Alright, so the new playtest classes have been officially announced, and it's time to talk about the Inquisitor. Wait, what? The Inquisitor's not in the playtest? Alright, that's it. Time to... Okay, fine. Let's talk about the real playtest classes that got announced. Today, I'm going to be reacting to some of the news from the Paizo Keynote Address for Gen Con on this episode of the Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. That's right, I'm a storyteller who is finally willing to admit what I have known all along, and that is that Paizo is not bringing the Witch Warper into Pathfinder 2nd Edition this year. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder. So for this video, I'm going to be reacting to some of the information that Erik Mona shared in the Paizo Keynote Address for Gen Con. And if you couldn't tell from the intro to this video, the main thing I'm going to be talking about is the new playtest classes that they have announced. That's probably going to be the bulk of the conversation for this video. But I will discuss some of the other books that they talked about and some of the other news that has been dropped. Now let me just say, I watched Erik Mona's presentation 2 hours ago. The information that I'm reacting to is just the first snippets of information that Paizo has given us in Gen Con. There may be more information that comes out over this weekend that won't necessarily make it into this video, but the new playtest is going to start on Monday, and I am making a very strong effort to get this video up on Sunday because the new playtest classes will be released on Monday, and I want to get that information out to you all. So I do apologize if there is any information that is missing from this video, but just the recording opportunities that I have are somewhat limited. To that effect, my normal Sunday videos are the Storytelling in Pathfinder 2e series. I am hoping to move this Sunday's storytelling video to Wednesday. So if you're looking for that video, don't worry, I'm still going to try to get that out this week. It's just moving to a different day because I want to get this video out before the playtest starts. One thing I'm not going to be discussing in depth in this video is the adventure path announcements that Paizo made, and that's honestly because, for the most part, I do not invest in adventure paths. There have been a few APs over the year that I have bought and tried to run, but usually I prefer homebrew content, and so APs really aren't my thing. So that's kind of a subject that goes in one ear and out the other for me, but they did make a lot of adventure path announcements, and if you're interested in some of the plans that Paizo has for their APs, both Pathfinder and Starfinder, I would encourage you to check out Erik Mona's presentation, and I'll throw a link down in the video description if you'd like to see that. There's definitely a lot of AP related stuff in that presentation, so if that's your thing, there's definitely some news there. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. But the first major chunk of information that Erik discussed was regarding Starfinder. And when it came to hardback books for Starfinder, he talked about 3 in specific. One of them is the book that is getting ready to release here soon, and that is the book Tech Revolution, which is going to have the Nanocyte class and rules for using mechs in Starfinder. Nanocytes and mechs are something that have been through public playtests for Paizo, and we're going to get to see what the final version of those rules look like. And I do have a copy of that book on order, so I do hope to discuss that book a little bit more in depth on this channel when it arrives. And I may even have some crossover content coming for Tech Revolution if everything lines up the way I'd like it to. After that, the next hardback book that they're going to have is Galactic Magic. And that's going to come with a new class called the Precog. Now, I will admit, of all of the classes that Paizo has playtested for Starfinder, the Precog is one that I've been a little bit worried about, and I really hope that the final version in Galactic Magic is going to be cleaner than what I saw in the playtest. I know I haven't really talked about that playtest on this channel, but if I'm being honest, I do have some concerns there, but I am happy to see that they're going to be offering some more support for magical systems in Starfinder. It is a science fantasy game, and if they're going to have heavy science with Tech Revolution, it's nice to see some heavy fantasy with galactic magic following that up in short order. I'm hoping the combination of those two books will help round out the options in the game really well. After that, they've announced a book called Drift Crisis. Now, the Drift is basically the hyperspace of the Starfinder setting, and it's been a known lore element for a while that the Drift sort of edges up against other planes like the realms of Celestials and Fiends in Starfinder, and that occasionally creatures might get pulled from other planar realms into the Drift. It's actually been mentioned as a potential story seed a few different times in Starfinder products. Now, they didn't go into a lot of detail about what the Drift Crisis is going to be, but they did mention those planar borders when they were talking about this book, and so I think we're going to see some celestial, fiendish, Aeon, you name it, invaders messing with starships as they are traveling through the Drift. Seems like a pretty easy guess on this one. They really didn't describe much about what player content would be available in Drift Crisis. They didn't call it an adventure path, but they did tie it to the overall narrative that is going to be happening in Starfinder, and they did say that there will be some small adventures in Drift Crisis, as well as an adventure path after Drift Crisis that will pull from the material in that book. So if I'm being honest, I'm not sure what to expect with Drift Crisis. You may remember with the Galaxy Exploration Manual, I said that one of my biggest complaints with the book is I really didn't know what to expect with that book, and I kind of find myself in the same place here. The explanation of Drift Crisis, at least so far, and granted I'm reacting to the initial announcement, has been very bare bones. We've really only gotten story elements, and I don't know what kind of player content or Game Master content you can expect from it. But it does sound like Paizo is getting ready to unleash their next big story arc in the Starfinder setting. So if nothing else, this book is going to inspire some cool adventures. So next up, Erik talked about Pathfinder products. And again, I'm going to be skipping over the adventure paths. There was a lot that he said on the adventure paths, but that wasn't really the main content that I was looking towards. He started out talking about Secrets of Magic and some of the response that people have been having to that book. And I have to say that Erik is describing a really great book, and it sounds like a really wonderful product. I wonder when I'll get mine, Paizo. So I've actually solved that mystery, and it looks like I've got another 2 weeks. But at least it's coming. After that, he moved on to the next major book that we know Paizo is going to be putting out for Pathfinder 2e, which is Guns and Gears. And most of the stuff that he talked about with Guns and Gears is things that we've already heard. He talked about the Gunslinger class. He talked about the new Inventor class. And he talked a little bit about some of the supporting mechanics that would go with those two classes. There was some interesting artwork and some interesting sketches of like some of the guns that they've worked up for the Gunslinger class. So it does look like they are expanding the equipment list to support these two classes. I know that's one of the common complaints people had from the playtest, and it does look like Paizo has addressed that particular concern. He did drop one thing that I thought was very interesting in the Guns and Gears section, although this was very quick, and he didn't linger on this very long, which was automatons as player characters. He really didn't describe how that was going to work. I don't know if this is going to be an ancestry, sort of like the android is. He mentioned the automaton as sort of the lingering remnants of an ancient empire where souls have become bound to these particular machines. I'm not sure exactly how Paizo is approaching this particular design decision, but I have to say it's a classic fantasy trope and an even more classic steampunk trope, so I think it's going to be a good inclusion to the book, whatever direction they go with this. And then after that, he talked a little bit about the Book of the Dead, which is the next, not really a monster book for Pathfinder 2e. There will be monsters in it. I think he said that there was going to be close to 100 undead creatures of different kinds in the books. And there's going to be player character content, like the ability to play undead PCs, and there's also going to be new monsters for Game Masters to use, and there's going to be lots of lore related to different areas of Golarion where undead might be common, or where you could expect to have adventures that would feature those elements very heavily. And if there's one major takeaway that I actually got from Erik Mona's presentation, it's this. Paizo appears to be moving away from crunch-heavy books. They seem to be moving towards books that are a mixture of crunch and fluff, if you will. The mechanics of the game mixed with the setting of the game. And you can actually see this in a lot of different places. For the Lost Omens line, they spent some time talking about the Grand Bazaar and Lost Omens Absalom. And we're used to the Lost Omens line having a lot of in-world lore, but for these main product line books, what we're seeing is they are pulling a lot of in-world lore alongside the mechanical elements that they're offering. Secrets of Magic has a look at the flavor of spellcasting from people who live inside of the game. Guns and Gears talks about places like Alkenstar, where guns are common, and other places in the Golarion setting where you might expect to find firearms. Book of the Dead is going to talk about Geb, which is a major undead-controlled city-state in the Golarion setting. And if you look at the Starfinder products we talked about, Drift Crisis, whatever that book is mechanically, it is going to feature very heavily the story elements of the Starfinder setting. So if I took anything from Erik's presentation, it is this, that the mainline books that Paizo is producing are going to be incorporating more of the story and setting and fluff elements of their world into the mechanical offerings that they are presenting for the game. And if I'm honest, I'm still trying to figure out what I think about this. I love Paizo as setting writers. They make fantastic game settings. The Golarion setting is far and away my favorite fantasy setting that's ever been published, and the Starfinder setting is honestly one of the main selling points of the Starfinder game. I love the setting that they developed for Starfinder. It is just extremely well done. So Paizo employs some fantastic setting writers, and so seeing more of those settings is a good thing. It's just kind of weird that they're mixing it in with kind of the mainline hardback rules element focused books that they publish. Now it looks like this integration of content in Secrets of Magic was extremely well done, so I have high hopes that Paizo is going to do well with this content in the other books that they're doing, Pathfinder and Starfinder both. But I will admit, this is an odd direction that they're taking. It's not something I'm used to seeing from Paizo. So I'm kind of curious how it's going to go. And now, before we get to the actual main thing you probably clicked on this video for, because burying the lead is fun, another thing that Erik Mona announced is something that they're calling Pathfinder Infinite and Starfinder Infinite. There wasn't a lot of detail on this, but basically it looks like they are setting up a way for people to publish inside the Pathfinder or Starfinder setting and do so through an official thing that Paizo is setting up. They called it a safe harbor for publishers, and they didn't offer a lot of details, but I'm going to go ahead and say, as someone who loves the art of storytelling and as someone who has always been interested in being an author, I'm very excited to hear that they are opening up a way for people in the Pathfinder and Starfinder community to get published in a way that is a recognized and official part of what Paizo is doing. I may revisit this topic in a future video. It's not truly game related, but it is something I'm very interested in, and I'm going to be digging into this some more. But enough drawing it out. Let's talk about the biggest announcement from Erik Mona's Keynote Address, and that is the new Pathfinder 2e hardcore book, which will be released at Gen Con next year, and that is Dark Archive. This book is being described as a book about the paranormal aspects of the Golarion setting. In keeping with the observation I made earlier, this book is being structured around the idea that some of the secrets that the Pathfinder Society had in one of their archives were stolen and released. If I remember correctly, I believe Erik said that there are going to be 8 different sections of this book representing 8 different dossiers that were somehow published regarding just different secrets, different crazy things that are going on in the Golarion setting. And he pretty much spells out that Dark Archive is kind of going to be the equivalent of Pathfinder First Edition's Occult Adventures. So this book was a relatively late addition to Paizo's product line in First Edition, so it's kind of cool to see them approaching this content fairly early in 2E's life cycle. I think that's better for the health of the game overall for them to be talking about this type of content early inside of the game rather than waiting until much farther down the road. If I'm being honest, Occult Adventures had a lot of good ideas in First Edition, but I didn't feel like they were always well implemented. There was a lot of content that I liked, but there was also a lot of content that I just didn't bother putting into my game because I didn't like the way it was structured. So I do think from a meta design perspective, Dark Archive is going to be a welcome addition because they're doing it early, and with occult magic being a full tradition inside of the game, it looks like it's going to be much better supported than it was in 1E. So overall, I'm very happy for the announcement, but the biggest part of the announcement is the two new classes are the Thaumaturge and the Psychic. Now, they basically said that the Thaumaturge is their reimagining of the Occultist from Pathfinder First Edition, and Occultist is one of those classes that has been pretty heavily requested. I've seen a lot of different people talking about redoing the Occultist for 2E, and when I did a poll about what people thought was going to be the new playtest classes, 22% of you all actually said that Occultist was your primary guess. So there's definitely some demand for the Occultist, or the Thaumaturge as it's being called now, and I think there's definitely going to be some interest in this class, but the description that Erik Mona gave was weird, because he didn't describe it as a caster class. When he was talking about the Occultist, he kept using the word talismans over and over and over again, and there was one part where he even seemed to imply that the Occultist was not going to be a caster. He didn't come out and just say that the Thaumaturge was not going to be able to cast spells. I think there will probably be some spellcasting worked into the class, but spellcasting is not going to be the core of whatever the Thaumaturge is. Now, in First Edition, the Occultist, their primary subclass was defined by their implements, which were then tied to the 8 different schools of magic inside the game. And the Thaumaturge's talismans could be a direct one-to-one with the 1E implements, but the thing that gives me pause is, in Pathfinder 2E, talisman is a specific mechanical thing already in the game. We already have rules for talismans. And so now I'm wondering exactly what Paizo is doing here, because it seems strange that Erik would use that word talismans over and over and over again with them being a specific mechanical rule if they were not going to be a very major part of whatever it is the Occultist is doing. As Erik Mona described the class, it sounds more like the Vestige Hunter from Battlezoo Bestiary than it actually does a caster class like the Magus or something inside 2E. So exactly what should we expect from the Thaumaturge? I'm not sure at this point, but I do feel like there's some hype here, and I am interested to see where Paizo is going to go. Now, the next playtest class that was mentioned is the Psychic, and the Psychic was also a class from Occult Adventures in Pathfinder 1E, and Erik didn't go nearly as in-depth on the Psychic as he did on the Thaumaturge in his presentation. That leads me to believe that the Psychic is probably going to look a lot more similar to First Edition Psychic than the Thaumaturge will to the 1E Occultist. After watching the keynote, I dug through Occult Adventures for a little bit, and I have to say Psychic feels like a class that'll be a little bit easier to do a direct conversion of. For example, the Psychic disciplines in 1E would be a very obvious thing that you could bring back to 2E as subclasses for the Psychic in this new edition. Now, Erik didn't give us a lot to go off when it comes to the Psychic, so there's not a lot we can really guess beyond just reading everything that was in 1E and trying to figure out what that might look like in 2E. But there is one thing from the First Edition Psychic that is very interesting and could make for an interesting concept to translate over to Pathfinder 2e. And that is, the Psychic could be a class with a flexible key attribute. In first edition, the Psychic had a different spellcasting attribute that was based on their Psychic discipline. A Psychic of self-improvement and a Psychic of faith would not necessarily have the same casting attribute. You could end up with a Psychic who had intelligence, wisdom, or charisma as the driver for their spellcasting in first edition, and I do think that is something that could reasonably be carried over to second edition, and the cool thing about that is that would set the Psychic apart as a caster class almost immediately inside of the game. There are some classes that have flexible key attributes, but typically it's a martial class. The fighter, the ranger, something like that. So far in second edition, major casting classes have not had flexibility behind their key attribute. You can't, for example, create a wizard that casts based off of wisdom, but the Psychic has a history of being able to do this from first edition. It's an unexplored game space in second edition, and it's a game space that could be interesting. I'm kind of curious if Paizo is going to carry that concept over, and if they do carry it over, I kind of wonder if they're going to do anything unique with that game space, because it was one of the things that made the Psychic stand out in 1E, and I feel like it's something that Paizo could do a lot with in second edition as well. But the great thing about all of this speculation is, this video should be going up on Sunday, and the playtest should actually be releasing tomorrow on Monday. So I encourage all of you to check out Paizo's website tomorrow, download the playtest document, take a look at these two classes. I'm going to see if I can drop a couple of these classes into my home Pathfinder game and hopefully get a little bit of the playtest experience with my table. I'm curious to see what Paizo's going to be doing with both of these classes, and I think we've got some cool stuff coming our way. But let me turn the conversation over to you. What do you all think? How do you feel about the new direction that Paizo is going with their hardback books, where they're integrating more lore into the mechanical content for the game? How do you feel about Pathfinder and Starfinder Infinite and the publishing safe harbor that Paizo is going to be trying to develop? And the most significant conversation at the moment, how do you feel about Dark Archive and the two new playtest classes we've got coming? Do the Thaumaturge and the Psychic interest you? Or are you never going to forgive Paizo because they haven't given us the Inquisitor yet? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Also, if you enjoyed this video, like it, share it, subscribe to the channel. If you're interested in being a part of the Disaster Tour Guide community, I encourage you to check out my free Discord page. Also, if you'd like to support this channel financially, I have a Patreon as well. You can find my Discord and Patreon both linked in the video description. But thank you so much for being a part of the conversation, and have a wonderful day.